I leaned against the school entrance, trying to shake off the unease that had been gnawing at me all morning. My eyes darted around the courtyard, searching for the familiar faces that made this place bearable. There they were, Jessica, as usual, in the middle of a lively conversation, her hands flying through the air as she spoke. Simon stood beside her, a smirk on his face as he cracked another one of his nerdy jokes. And then there was William, casually leaning against the wall, his eyes scanning the crowd. My heart skipped a beat when our eyes met, but I quickly looked away, hoping no one noticed. "Yo, over here," Jessica called, waving me over. I forced a grin and walked towards them, my hands shoved deep into my pockets. "Morning, sunshine," she teased, pulling me into a quick hug. "Morning," I mumbled, returning the gesture. Simon gave me a playful punch on the arm, and I chuckled, trying to ignore the way William's presence made my skin prickle. "What's up with you? You look like you barely slept," Simon observed, raising an eyebrow. "Just a rough night," I replied, shrugging it off. "Nothing new." William's eyes lingered on me for a second longer than usual, and I felt a jolt of something. Was it guilt? I wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't afford to think too much about it. Not here, not now. "Ready to ace that history test?" Jessica asked, clearly trying to change the subject. "Always," I lied, forcing another smile. In reality, history was the last thing on my mind. As we walked towards the classroom, I could feel William's gaze on me, and it took everything in me not to turn around and look at him. The air was thick with unsaid things, and I wondered if today would be the day when everything changed. "Let's get this over with," I muttered to myself, pushing open the door to the classroom. But as I stepped inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something big that I wasn't ready for. The school day dragged on, each class more unbearable than the last. By the time the final bell rang, I was itching to get out of there. The weekend couldn't come fast enough. I needed a break from all the pretending, the forced smiles, and the stolen glances that no one else seemed to notice but me. "Party at Jake's tonight," Simon announced as we left the building. "You guys in?" "Of course," Jessica replied without hesitation. "You coming?" She turned to me, eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Yeah, sure," I answered, though my mind was already elsewhere. I knew what happened when we all got together at Jake's. Too much booze, too little judgment. And with William going, the whole thing felt like a ticking time bomb. "William," you and Simon asked, his tone casual, but I could feel the shift in the air. William paused, then nodded. "Yeah, I'll be there." The three of them kept chatting as we walked, but I was too wrapped up in my own thoughts to contribute. I could feel William's presence beside me, closer than usual. When our arms brushed, I nearly jumped out of my skin. I glanced at him, and for a split second, his expression softened, like he wanted to say something, but then he looked away, and the moment passed. That night, the party was in full swing by the time we arrived. Jake's house was packed, music blasting, bodies moving in every direction. I grabbed a drink, downing it faster than I should have. The alcohol hit me hard, but that's what I needed, something to dull the anxiety that had been buzzing in my head all day. Hours passed in a blur of music and laughter. Jessica was busy flirting with some guy, and Simon had disappeared somewhere with a girl from our class. I found myself sitting on the porch steps, staring up at the sky, trying to make sense of the mess in my head. Then, out of nowhere, William sat down beside me. "You okay?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the music. "Yeah, just needed some air," I replied, my heart racing at his proximity. "You've been quiet tonight," he observed, his gaze fixed on me. There was something different in his eyes, something that made my pulse quicken. "Just a lot on my mind," I admitted, not knowing how else to explain the turmoil inside me. He nodded, and we sat in silence for a moment, the noise from the party fading into the background. I couldn't take it anymore, the tension, the unspoken words. Without thinking, I turned to him, my breath catching in my throat. "William, Before I could finish, he leaned in, closing the space between us. His lips brushed against mine, hesitant at first, then more confident as he realized I wasn't pulling away. My mind went blank, every thought drowned out by the heat of his kiss, the feel of his hand on the back of my neck, pulling me closer. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, staring at him in shock. He looked just as stunned, his eyes wide, his chest rising and falling rapidly. He started, but I shook my head, still reeling from what had just happened. We should go back inside, I said quickly, standing up before I could second-guess myself. Without waiting for his response, I pushed through the door and back into the chaos of the party, my heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. But no matter how hard I tried to lose myself in the crowd, I couldn't escape the fact that everything had just changed forever. The next morning I woke up with a pounding headache and a gnawing sense of dread. The events of last night replayed in my mind on a loop: the kiss, the way William looked at me, the way I bolted like a coward. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I checked my phone. No messages from William, no messages from anyone, actually. Maybe they were all nursing their own hangovers, but the silence felt heavier than that. I dragged myself out of bed, trying to piece together what I was supposed to do next. Jessica texted me first. "Hey, brunch." I needed normal, so I agreed. We met at our usual spot, a small cafe where the staff knew us well enough to have our orders ready by the time we sat down. Jessica was her usual bubbly self, filling the air with stories from the party that I could barely remember. "Where did you disappear to last night?" she asked suddenly, breaking my train of thought. "Oh, just needed some air. It got pretty stuffy in there," I replied, hoping she wouldn't press further. "Well, you missed quite the show. Simon tried karaoke. It was a disaster," she laughed, and I managed a weak smile. William seemed off too. "Did you guys have a fight or something?" My heart skipped. No, nothing like that. Why? I don't know, he just seemed different. Maybe it was just the booze, she shrugged, taking a sip of her coffee. "Anyway, you two were the first to bail. Kind of lame if you ask me." "Yeah, sorry about that," I muttered, focusing on my plate. As soon as brunch was over, I checked my phone again. Still nothing from William. The silence was eating me alive, and I knew I couldn't just sit around waiting. I had to know where we stood. I found him at the park later that afternoon, sitting on a bench near the lake. He looked up as I approached, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The memory of the kiss hung in the air between us, thick and unavoidable. "Hey," I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Hey," he replied, his eyes scanning my face like he was searching for something. I sat down next to him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body but far enough to keep a safe distance. "About last night," I began, but he cut me off. "I don't regret it," he said, his voice steady, but there was a vulnerability in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. My heart skipped again, but this time for a different reason. "Neither do I admitted, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "But where do we go from here?" he asked, finally voicing the question that had been circling my mind all day. "I don't know," I answered honestly, "but I know we can't keep pretending like nothing happened." He nodded, and we both fell silent, watching the ducks glide across the lake. The simplicity of the scene felt surreal, given the storm raging inside both of us. I've never felt like this before," he admitted, his voice breaking the silence. "Me neither," I replied, turning to face him fully. "But this isn't going to be easy. Not here, not with everyone we know." "Do you think we can do this?" he asked, and I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. I took a deep breath. "We have to try, don't we?" He looked at me, and for the first time since last night, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes.
Yeah, we do."
We sat there for a while longer, neither of us wanting to leave the moment, because once we stood up, reality would come crashing back in. But eventually, the sun began to set, and we both knew it was time to go. As we walked away from the park, our shoulders brushed, and for a brief moment, it felt like everything might just be okay. But I knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge was ahead, keeping this secret, navigating the looks, the questions, the rumors that were sure to come. And as much as I wanted to hold on to the hope that flickered in William's eyes, I couldn't ignore the weight of what lay ahead. But for now, it was enough to know that we were in this together. The following weeks were a whirlwind of stolen moments and hushed conversations. William and I fell into a rhythm, meeting whenever we could find the time between classes, after school, and especially on the weekends when we could slip away unnoticed. But the secrecy was starting to wear on us, more than I wanted to admit. It was a Friday afternoon, and I was supposed to meet William at our usual spot, an old abandoned shed at the edge of town. But as I made my way there, I noticed something off. The usual tranquility of the place was replaced by a sense of unease. I pushed open the door and found William pacing, his face pale and drawn. "What's wrong?" I asked, immediately on edge. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "It's Simon," he said, his voice tense. My stomach dropped. "What about him?" "He knows," William whispered, his eyes locking onto mine. "He saw us last weekend. I didn't notice him at the time, but he was there. He knows everything." The room seemed to tilt. Did he say anything? "Not yet, but you know Simon. He's not the type to keep quiet for long," William replied, frustration lacing his voice. "I don't know what to do. He's been acting weird around me all week, like he's just waiting for the right moment to drop the bomb." Panic surged through me. Simon was our friend, but he was also a wild card, someone who loved to stir the pot just to see what would happen. If he told Jessica, if he told anyone, the thought made my head spin. "We need to talk to him," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe we can convince him to keep this between us." "Do you really think he'll stay quiet?" William asked, doubt heavy in his tone. I didn't answer because I wasn't sure myself. But we had to try. That night we arranged to meet Simon at a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. I could feel the tension radiating from William as we sat down at the table, waiting for Simon to arrive. When he finally did, he looked at us with a smirk that sent a chill down my spine. "Hey guys," Simon said, sliding into the seat across from us, "so what's up?" This seemed serious. I exchanged a glance with William before speaking. "Simon, we know you saw us last weekend." Simon's smirk widened, and he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Yeah, I saw you. Didn't think you two had it in you, honestly." "Look, this isn't a joke," William cut in, his voice sharp. "We're asking you to keep this to yourself. No one else needs to know." Simon's eyes flicked between us, and for a moment I thought he might actually consider it. But then he shook his head, laughing under his breath. "You guys really think you can keep something like this a secret forever? This town is a gossip mill, and you two are sitting right at the center of it." "Simon, please," I pleaded, feeling desperation claw at my chest. "We're not ready for this to get out. You know how people will react." Simon's expression softened, but only a little. "I'm not trying to out you, okay? But you need to be realistic. People are going to find out eventually whether you like it or not. And honestly, the longer you keep it a secret, the worse it's going to get." William tensed beside me, and I could see the conflict in his eyes. He was right, we couldn't hide forever. But hearing it from Simon made it feel all too real, like the ground was crumbling beneath our feet. "What do you want?" Simon William asked, his voice low and controlled. "What's it going to take to keep this quiet?" Simon looked at us for a long moment before finally sighing. "I'm not going to say anything, not now at least. But you two need to figure out what you're going to do, because this isn't going away. And when it does come out, well, you'd better be ready." He stood up, leaving us at the table with our thoughts spinning in a million directions. The weight of his words hung over us like a dark cloud, and I knew that our time was running out. The walls were closing in, and we had no idea how to stop it. As we walked back to the car, William was silent, his mind clearly racing. I wanted to say something, anything, to make this better, but there were no words for the mess we were in. "We need a plan," I finally said, breaking the silence. "We need to figure out how to handle this before it blows up in our faces." "Yeah," William agreed, though he sounded far from convinced. "But what if we can't?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the game had changed, and we were running out of time. The tension between William and me was almost unbearable after that night with Simon. We both knew he was right, our secret wasn't going to stay hidden forever, and when it did come out, it would be a disaster. The following week at school was like walking on eggshells. Every glance, every whisper, felt like it could be the moment when everything came crashing down. Friday rolled around again, and with it, another party, this time at Jessica's place. I wasn't in the mood for it, but not showing up would only raise suspicions. William and I agreed to meet there, but we both knew this was just a thinly veiled attempt to keep up appearances. We were spiraling, and neither of us had any idea how to stop it. When I arrived, the house was already packed. Jessica greeted me with a warm smile, pulling me into the crowd. "You made it," she exclaimed, handing me a drink. "I was beginning to think you'd become a hermit." I forced a laugh. Nah, just been busy. My eyes scanned the room, searching for William. I spotted him in the corner, deep in conversation with Simon. A pit formed in my stomach. What were they talking about? I barely had time to think before Jessica grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the kitchen. Come on, let's get you something stronger. You look like you could use it. I let her drag me along, but my mind was on William and Simon. I needed to know what was going on. After a few minutes of half-hearted small talk, I excused myself and made my way back to where I'd seen them. As I approached, their conversation came into focus. You can't keep this up forever, man, Simon was saying, his voice low but firm. The longer you wait, the worse it's going to be for both of you. William's jaw was clenched, his hands shoved into his pockets. I know that he replied, frustration clear in his tone. But it's not that simple. Simon sighed. I get it, I do. But you need to make a choice. Either you're in this for real, or you're not. You can't have it both ways. I stopped in my tracks, my heart racing. I knew what Simon was getting at, and it terrified me. William looked up then, and our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. Then, with a resigned expression, he excused himself from Simon and walked over to me. We need to talk, he said, his voice tight. Yeah, I figured, I replied, trying to keep my own voice steady. We stepped outside, away from the noise of the party. The night air was cool, a stark contrast to the heat building between us. William leaned against the porch railing, his shoulders tense. Simon's right, he said finally, breaking the silence. We can't keep doing this. It's tearing us apart. I nodded, the weight of his words settling over me like a lead blanket. So what do we do? Come out, let everyone know. He looked at me, his eyes full of conflict. I don't know. Part of me wants to, but then I think about everything that could go wrong, what it would do to us, to our families, to Jessica. The mention of Jessica stung. She still had no idea what was going on, and the guilt of keeping this from her was eating me alive. But the thought of losing William, of pretending like nothing had happened between us, was just as unbearable. What do you want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to be with you, he admitted, his voice raw with emotion. But I'm scared. I'm scared of what's going to happen if we go public. But I'm also scared of what's going to happen if we keep hiding. I stepped closer, closing the distance between us. I'm scared too, I confessed. But I don't want to lose you, William. I can't. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I could see the war going on inside him. Finally, he took a deep breath. If we do this, we do it together. No more hiding, no more secrets. We tell everyone, and we deal with whatever comes. His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of the decision we were about to make. This was at the moment that would define everything. I knew the risks, knew the potential fallout, but I also knew that I couldn't keep living in fear. Okay, I said, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions raging inside me. We do it together. He reached out, taking my hand in his, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't going to be easy, nothing about this was, but at least we were making the choice together. As we stood there, hand in hand, I realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter. One where we stopped running and started facing the world head-on, no matter what it threw at us. But even as I made that decision, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that the hardest part was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up with a mix of anxiety and determination swirling in my chest. William and I had made the decision, and now there was no turning back. But knowing what had to be done didn't make it any easier. We agreed to meet Jessica first. She deserved to hear it from us before anyone else did. I texted her, asking if we could talk. Her response was immediate, sure, come over. Everything okay? I stared at the screen for a moment before replying, we just need to talk. When we arrived at Jessica's house, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. William squeezed my hand as we walked up to her door, but neither of us said a word. We didn't need to, we both knew what was at stake. Jessica opened the door with a smile, but it faltered when she saw our faces. What's going on? She asked, her eyes flicking between us. Can we sit down? William asked, his voice calm but tense. Sure, she said slowly, leading us into the living room. We sat on the couch, and she took the chair opposite us, her brow furrowed with concern. "You're scaring me. What's wrong?" I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating all at once. "Jessica, there's something we need to tell you," I began, my voice barely steady. She nodded, leaning forward slightly, her eyes fixed on me. "Okay." I glanced at William, who gave me a small nod of encouragement. "Jessica, William and I. We're together," I said, the words rushing out in a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment she just stared at us. "What do you mean?" "Together," she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. William took a deep breath, reaching for my hand. "We've been seeing each other for a while now. We didn't know how to tell you, or anyone." Jessica's gaze dropped to our joined hands, and the silence that followed was unbearable. When she finally looked up, her expression was a mix of hurt and confusion. "You've been lying to me this whole time," she whispered. "It wasn't like that," I said quickly, my heart aching at the pain in her voice. "We didn't mean to hurt you. We were just scared. Of what people would think, of what it would do to our friendships." "And you thought keeping it a secret was the better option," she snapped, her eyes flashing with anger now. "Do you have any idea how this feels? To find out like this?" "Jess, we're sorry," William said, his voice filled with regret. "We should have told you sooner. We just didn't know how." She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "You could have trusted me," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm your best friend. I would have supported you, but now, I don't even know what to think." My chest tightened as I watched her struggle with the revelation. I knew this was going to be hard, but seeing the hurt in her eyes was worse than I'd imagined. "Jessica, please," I started, but she held up her hand to stop me. "I need some time," she said, her voice shaking. "I need to process this. I just can't do this right now." She stood up, wrapping her arms around herself as if to ward off the cold. "I think you should go," she added quietly. We stood, but I couldn't bring myself to move. "Jessica, we never wanted to hurt you," I said, desperation creeping into my voice. She didn't look at us. "Just go," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. William gently tugged on my hand, and I knew there was nothing more we could say. We left her house, the door closing behind us with a finality that echoed in my chest. The walk to the car was silent, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on us. As soon as we got inside, I let out a shaky breath, running my hands through my hair. "That was a disaster," I muttered, my voice thick with emotion. William nodded, staring straight ahead. "Yeah, it was." We sat there for a moment, the reality of what we'd just done sinking in. Jessica was our first, and I knew she wouldn't be the last. But this was just the beginning of facing everything we'd been avoiding for so long. "I don't know if she'll ever forgive us," I said quietly, the thought weighing heavily on me. "She will," William replied, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "But it's going to take time." I nodded, knowing he was right. But that didn't make it any easier. We'd crossed the point of no return, and there was no telling where this would lead us. As we drove away from Jessica's house, I realized that this was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But as much as it hurt, I knew it was necessary. We couldn't keep hiding, couldn't keep living in fear of what others might think. This was our truth, and it was time to own it, even if it meant losing the people we cared about along the way. The next few days were a blur of uncertainty and anxiety. Jessica hadn't reached out since our conversation, and the silence was deafening. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, only to sink again when it wasn't her. William and I kept our distance from the rest of the group, unsure of what might happen next. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, everything came crashing down. I was walking through the hallway between classes when I noticed people staring at me more than usual. Whispers followed me like a shadow, and I felt the weight of their eyes on my back. My stomach twisted into knots as I hurried to the classroom, where William and I usually met during lunch. He was already there, pacing by the window. The second he saw me, I knew something was wrong. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked up, his face pale. "They know," he said, his voice flat. "Everyone knows." My heart dropped. "What? How?" "Someone posted about us online," he explained, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "Pictures, rumors, it's all out there." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. Who would do that, I asked, my mind racing. Was it Simon? William shook his head. I don't think so. He wouldn't do this. Not like this. But it doesn't matter now. It's out there, and we can't take it back. Panic surged through me. What are we going to do? He walked over to me, grabbing my hands. We face it, he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. We knew this was a possibility. Now we just have to deal with it. I nodded, trying to absorb the shock. What about Jessica? Have you heard from her? Not yet, he admitted. But she'll find out soon enough, if she hasn't already. The thought made my chest tighten. We need to talk to her before she hears it from someone else. Just then, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out, and my heart skipped when I saw Jessica's name on the screen. We need to talk. Meet me at the park after school. I showed the message to William, who nodded. You should go. I think she needs to hear it from you. What about you? I asked, reluctant to leave him alone in this mess. I'll be fine, he assured me, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. We knew this wasn't going to be easy, but we're in it together, remember? Yeah, together, I echoed, though the word felt hollow in the face of what was happening. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I barely registered my classes, my mind too wrapped up in the storm that had just hit. By the time the final bell rang, my nerves were frayed, and I was dreading the confrontation that awaited me. I headed to the park, my heart pounding with each step. Jessica was already there, sitting on our usual bench, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and walked over, sitting down beside her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The tension was suffocating, and I could feel the distance between us like a chasm. Finally, she broke the silence. So, it's true, she said, her voice flat. I nodded, unable to find the words to make this better. Yeah, it's true. She stared straight ahead, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Why didn't you tell me sooner? I was scared, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Scared of what it would mean, of how you'd react. I didn't want to lose you. Her eyes flicked to mine, filled with hurt and something else, something I couldn't quite place. You should have trusted me, she said quietly. I thought we told each other everything. I know, I said, guilt crashing over me like a wave. I'm sorry, Jess, I never wanted to hurt you. She looked away, and the silence stretched on, thick and heavy. When she finally spoke again, her voice was softer, more vulnerable. This changes everything, you know that, right? I know, I replied, my throat tight. But it doesn't have to change us. She sighed, closing her eyes for a moment. I'm not saying I'm okay with this. I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. But I don't want to lose you either. Hope flickered in my chest. So where does that leave us? She was quiet for a long moment, then turned to face me fully. It leaves us figuring this out, one step at a time. I can't promise it's going to be easy, and I'm still hurt that you didn't trust me. But I'm willing to try if you are. Relief washed over me, and I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I'm willing, Jess. I don't want to lose you either. She gave me a small, tentative smile. Good. Because we've been through too much to let this tear us apart. I nodded, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders just a little. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a chance to mend what had been broken. As we sat there, the sun dipping low in the sky, I knew this was far from over. The town was buzzing with rumors, and the real fallout was just beginning. But for the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had William, and now maybe, just maybe, I still had Jessica too. But as we walked away from the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest battles were still ahead of us. We were stepping into the unknown, and there was no telling what awaited us on the other side. In the days that followed, the news of our relationship spread like wildfire. The rumors, the whispers, the stares, they were everywhere. I couldn't walk down a hallway without feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on me, judging, questioning. It was like the whole town had turned against us, and the pressure was suffocating. But even through all of that, William and I held firm. We were tired of hiding. We were tired of hiding. We had made our choice, and now we were standing by it. It was the end of the week when things finally came to a head. William and I had agreed to meet up at the diner after school, hoping that a little bit of normalcy might help us find our footing again. As I pushed through the door, the familiar sound of the bell above the entrance made me feel like I was stepping into another world, one where everything wasn't falling apart. William was already there, sitting in our usual booth at the back. He gave me a small smile as I slid in across from him. "Hey," he said softly, his voice just loud enough to be heard over the chatter of the diner. "Hey," I replied, trying to muster a smile of my own. But the tension in the air made it hard. I could feel the eyes of other diners on us, and I knew exactly what they were thinking. "How are you holding up?" he asked, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I've been better," I admitted, squeezing back. "But I've also been worse." He chuckled, a sound that made my chest tighten in the best way. "Yeah, me too." We sat there for a moment, just holding hands, finding some comfort in the small act of defiance. It felt good to be together, to be seen together. To be seen together, even if it wasn't always easy. But before I could say anything else, I noticed someone approaching our booth out of the corner of my eye. "Jessica." "Hey," she said, her voice tentative. "Mind if I join you?" I glanced at William, who gave a slight nod, and then back at Jessica. "Of course not," I said, sliding over to make room for her. She sat down next to me, her eyes flicking between us. "Look, I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her tone serious. "And I just want to say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how I reacted, and I'm sorry that I didn't see what was going on sooner." "Jess, you don't have to apologize," William said gently. "We're the ones who should be sorry. We should have trusted you from the start." She shook her head. "No, I get why you didn't. This town isn't exactly the most open-minded place, and I can't imagine how hard it's been for you two. But I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what." Relief flooded through me, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "That means more than you know." She smiled, a genuine smile that made my chest ache with gratitude. "You guys are my friends, and I want to be here for you, no matter what anyone else says." Just as I was about to respond, I saw Simon walking toward us, a sheepish look on his face. "Hey, can I join this little reunion?" he asked, hovering by the edge of the booth. William nodded, sliding over to make space. "Of course." Simon sat down, glancing at all of us. "I just want to say, I'm sorry too. I didn't handle things the way I should have. I was trying to look out for you guys, but I guess I just made things worse." "It's okay, Simon," I said. "We know you were just trying to help in your own way." He grinned, a little embarrassed. "Yeah, well, it didn't work out so great, did it?" We all laughed, the tension breaking just a little. For the first time in what felt like forever, it seemed like things might actually be okay. We were still facing an uphill battle, but at least we weren't facing it alone. As we sat there, talking and laughing like old times, I realized that this was what mattered. Not the rumors, not the stares, not what anyone else thought. Just us, together, facing whatever came our way. After a while, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, and for a moment it felt like we were just a group of friends hanging out, like nothing had changed. And maybe, in a way, nothing had. We were still us, still figuring things out, still trying to make it through one day at a time. When we finally left the diner, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow over everything. William took my hand as we walked, and I didn't pull away. I was done hiding, done pretending. This was who we were, and I was proud of that. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. I looked at him, my heart full. "As ready as I'll ever be." He smiled, and together we stepped forward, leaving the past behind and moving into whatever the future had in store for us. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay,